My name is Reverend Dr. Greg Bolt, and with me today is our co-host Bob Rossi. Bob is a union organizer. He is a friend, one person, conversation partner, and more importantly, he's also Appalachian. And so we go, even though we just met each other a couple years ago, we go way back. And our guest today is Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharris. Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharris. Reverend Liz is an organizer, is the title. She's the executive director and founder of the Kairos Center and co-moderator of the Poor People's Campaign here that's been nationally been working. And both Bob and I work with the Poor People's Campaign here in Oregon. So we're excited to have her on today for our conversation about In the Middle of Everything. Before we get started, I wanted to say Bob and I were talking about what being in the middle even looks like or what that means. Because I find myself in the middle, or what I think is the middle, but then a lot of people put me way to the left, theologically or ideologically, but I don't know if I agree with that. And so just referring what the middle looks like. And Bob and I have done some work and had some conversations, but Reverend Liz, first question is, you talk about in your new book, you only get what you're organized to take. You talk a little bit about your family and your upbringing. And I just want to say, like, how did you get to be the like champion of solidarity and like the person that one of the people I look up to in this movement? I'm going to try not to fangirl too much, but how did you get here? How did you become who you are today? Yeah, so that's what I'm going to start with there.
Awesome. Well, it's really good to be in conversation with you. Thanks so much for inviting me. And yeah, I'm excited to be in conversation. So I think in terms of the question of like, how did I get to be where I am right now and committed to the things I'm committed to and involved in the things that I'm involved in, it really is like, just like kind of every step along the way has led me to the moment that we're in and the work that I get to do. And I'm really lucky to get to do. I mean, I was raised in a family that was very active in local, national, and global justice issues. Uh, so from a very young age, I was going to events and lectures and protests. I was hosting in my family's house faith leaders that were in the cutting edge of all kinds of social justice struggles around the world, whether it was the struggle against apartheid in South Africa or the struggle for a free Palestine in the Middle East, whether it was a part of the kind of solidarity and sanctuary movements back in the 80s and 90s and then still today. Um, uh, and we were a family that was really committed to nuclear freeze and to kind of peace and justice at home and abroad. And when I went to college in Philadelphia in the mid 1990s, my first day of being on campus, I met grassroots anti-poverty organizations, movement organizations that, kind of put me or kept me right on this same path. And so, for the past 30 plus years, I have been doing very grassroots anti-poverty organizing with folks that are most impacted by poverty and homelessness and dispossession and economic insecurity. And it was actually those leaders that then kind of sent me to seminary, said, hey, we need to figure out both the ways that Bible and theology are being used and abused to kind of blame poor people as sinners and not talk about poverty as a sin. And we need to figure out this question of what, you know, uh, how do we organize at every kind of grassroots local level? And so just like every everything I've done and every person I've met has led me to do the next thing and meet the next person. And so again, I feel like I'm really lucky. I've really lived a very long life of getting to kind of live out my faith beliefs, um, of doing justice and loving kindness and walking humbly, um, like my whole existence. And so who gets to say that? I mean, who gets to kind of live out what they were raised to believe and just uh, live my life trying to have an impact on others.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to drill down on that a little. I felt as I read your book how our lives intersect. My mother came from Kensington and ended up there quite a bit when I was a kid, but I also feel like I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church. And I'm wondering about how your Armenian and Greek heritage influenced you to make the decisions you did. And then on top of that, I've been in Diyarbakir, center of Armenia, once a center of Armenians in what's today southern Turkey or North Kurdistan. And I've been in Istanbul, and I've seen the great work being done by Armenians and Kurds and Syriacs and others in putting forward a very advanced progressive agenda. And then just this week, I saw that in Jackson, Mississippi, the Poor People's Organizing there is teaching some of those principles taken from Armenians and Kurds and teaching it there. So I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little about how your heritage and background influenced you, if it did, and also if you're aware of the ties or the knowledge being passed between Armenians and Kurds and others to poor people here in places like Jackson.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So uh my Armenian heritage is really top of mind right now. Last week I returned from Armenia, where I was there with my family, with my husband and my kids and my siblings and their kids and my cousin, um, because we were actually delivering a poem that my great grandfather wrote. 6 weeks after the massacre at Adana, which was in 1909, one of the real turning points towards the Armenian genocide. And over the last couple of years, my cousin and my sister and have kind of discovered that my great grandfather wrote and preserved this long form lamentation poem. And we brought it home. And we presented it to the Armenian Genocide Museum, and they're gonna both do lots of work and research based on it, because there's nothing, it seems to be very singular there in terms of from when it's from and much of its contents. But it was really a moving and pretty significant experience. I was always raised with my Greek and Armenian heritage as pretty in the forefront. It was clear to me that I was the granddaughter of immigrants on my father's side, Greek, who had come to this country looking for an American dream and really found a nightmare of poverty and dispossession. And then on my mom's side, the granddaughter of Armenian genocide survivors. Uh, and so both the stories of my family and the lessons um, from that first genocide in the 20th century uh, like helped to really shape my outlook. Uh, I never was particularly involved in Armenian kind of American communities, other than kind of my family. Though there are definitely, as you were saying, very developed and advanced scholars and activists who come out of Armenia and the region. Um, about 10 years ago, I actually was able to visit Tbilisi, Georgia, and Yerevan, Armenia, with a bunch of social movement leaders, including from the Caucasus, from the area, and learned a lot about the powerful, like, organizing that people were doing and are continuing to do. And I think, just some of the more general lessons from the Armenian genocide that, I think unfortunately we haven't really learned in the world. Uh, Again, it was incredibly moving to be in the Armenian Genocide Museum and amongst a bunch of scholars and genocide scholars and activists, you know, just so recently, to be talking about, the political moves of the moment, the kind of creep of extremism across the world, the particular role of authoritarianism and extremism and Christian nationalism in the US, in this moment. And even to hear these scholars and leaders and activists, talk about how much we all feel like we have failed, that in 2023, uh, uh, hundreds of thousands of Armenians had to escape from Artsakh, from Nagorno-Karabakh, in what was a continued kind of genocide, of Armenians, uh, what's going on in Gaza and across Palestine, uh, and in other parts of the world. Not to mention then to have to be in Armenia right when there was kind of an occupation of Washington, D.C., taking place, and having unhoused encampments and communities being absolutely terrorized and destroyed, and just, seeing the connections, between all of through history and to today, of, fanning the flames of violence and hate, and where it leads and where it's leading.
Thanks a lot, Reverend Liz. I was thinking about, man, I just really appreciate you sharing some of your story and then sharing a little bit about that experience. The thing that I was thinking about, and you talked about earlier about faith and living out your values and living out the faith that you were taught. And I know of, and you and I both are ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, which I hold. I don't know if you know this, but when anybody mentions Mr. Rogers, I have to say it's required in my ordination vows to say he was a Presbyterian pastor. And you have that same, in my life, you have that same honor or expectation. So anytime anybody says anything about the Poor People's Campaign or Kairos Center or you individual, I say, she's a Presbyterian pastor, right? So just want you to know that. So acting out of the faith, and how did you become Presbyterian? Where does that sort of get from Armenian Greek background? And then also, here's a question that I have. At what point do we admit that the church has failed, and maybe even ask if the church is part of the problem, not the solution? Because we have 2,000 years of history to side with the poor, and poverty is worse today than it was in Jesus's time. And the Presbyterian Church, USA, which is reportedly one of the wealthiest denominations in the world, we have billions of dollars in assets, and yet we still have poverty on the street.
Yeah, thank you for all of that. I mean, I hear all of it. So, I mean, the way I was raised Presbyterian. My mom was raised Presbyterian. Her father went off to war, the Korean War, when she was a little girl, and her mom felt it would be the right thing to do is start bringing the kids to church. And the closest church was a Presbyterian one in Highland Park, Michigan. And so
Sure.
that's where they went. And so it meant that, my mom was raised Presbyterian and then, stayed active in the Presbyterian church and then raised her kids, that way. And, and I'm raising mine. And so I was active in the Presbyterian Church from a very young age. I was a Sunday school teacher by 13. I was a deacon by 16. I mean, like, church was my second home.
Did you go to Triennium at all?
I did. I went to Triennium. It would have been sometime in the 90s. I don't know when.
95. Did you go in 95? Do you think
I didn't go to 95. I probably went to the
close to the same age, but anyway, I'm sorry.
I would have gone to the one 3 years before, I guess.
So the 92, yeah.
Must have been 92 because that's when I would have been in high school.
Okay.
Sorry. And I never went afterwards. But I just actually a couple weeks ago was leading worship at Synod School, which is a very
Yes. Oh God, I love Synod School. I love
and
it so much.
I had gone as a little person. So it's just all the Presbyterian connections. But then it actually leads to this question about, like, is the church failing? Because I even think about my own experience. And I kind of love this story that I definitely have to remind lots of people that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterian because it was such a point of pride. It was also one of the TV shows I was allowed to watch, and so it was like a staple in my home. But I went to seminary after doing lots of grassroots anti-poverty organizing because I was kind of sent, like I was saying before. And I started the ordination process, and actually, it took me 12 years to be ordained. In most part because the church didn't really see this call to end poverty as central to the church, even though there's nothing that's talked about more in the Bible, perhaps other than idolatry, which I think has everything to do with actually how we treat poor and marginalized people as well, and kind of the worship of money and of power instead of God and of justice. But and all of those years of trying to be ordained, and like I to me was kind of further evidence of where the church stands on issues of justice. Again, not because it was about me, but because it was just clear, like, from the first meeting I had with someone in my ordination committee, my liaison, where the person said to me that if I kept on talking about ending poverty, I would never be ordained because didn't I know that Jesus said the poor will be with you always, to, the folks, questioning me when I was trying to get the Kairos Center and work I was doing to be validated as a ministry of the church, when folks, said back to me, well, Jesus, why do you want to be ordained? Jesus wasn't ordained. And I had to say, well, I'm not Jesus. And the communities in which I'm serving and organizing and spending time in, to actually have ordained minister be able to baptize the kids, to be able to perform the funerals, to be able to offer communion, at encampments, that mattered. Folks failed to be able to see that was the core work of the church. And so I think this question about, where is the church on the issues of our day? I mean, I think is a really significant one. And, I think somehow we have allowed there to be an equal sign between kind of hate and violence and extremism and Christianity. I think we have allowed the kind of major theologies to be out in the world, being kind of blaming poor people for their poverty and pitting people against each other, and talking about the moral, quote unquote, issues of the day being about marriage and, like, who can marry who, and the kind of right to have your own property instead of the things that the Bible talks about. Woe to you who who pass oppressive laws and legislate evil, or like or woe to folks who are adding house to house until no one lives on the land, or the wages you failed to pay your workers are crying out against you. They're a roar in the ears of God. Or like, I mean, and we could just keep on, stop grinding the faces of the poor. I mean, we could just go and go and go about what the Bible really says about poverty and justice and love and peace. And yet, we aren't having like a major discussion or debate in our society right now about what a quote unquote Christian response, a biblical response to war and violence and impoverishment, because the very people that are being impacted and victimized by the current policies, whether it's passing people, taking people off of healthcare or food benefits, or just or stopping housing first policies, or rolling over people's possessions and throwing them out right now. I mean, the Bible is very clear about how that is anathema to God, and that is anathema to Christianity. And yet we have people that call themselves Christians um, who are doing all of it. And too many of us are being quiet, and not being able to kind of live out really what we're supposed to be doing, and of everybody in and nobody out.
Yeah, I love in the new book, You Only Get What You Organize to Take, the talk about Grays Harbor, and I think the name of the chapter name is The Bible is Contested Text. And so Bob and I talk about this quite a bit, about the scriptures and what we think the scripture says, or what we've been told the scripture says, versus what it actually says. I said a couple weeks ago about I think it's been too easy to be Christian in this country for a long time, because we were talking about Jesus saying, "Follow me." Those that give up their life will lose it, or those that try to save their life will lose it. And so, and also, Bob and I were having this conversation earlier about what. So let's just say we actually listen to Jesus, right? Or the history of our scriptures, the history of our ancestors around poverty. And by the way, the book, your book, and they always with us, what Jesus really said about the poor, we read at my congregation in rural Minnesota, which I think opened up a lot of eyes. And so the idea of, okay, so let's just imagine a world where we're actually a biblically based economy. Okay, let's just go there. What now? Like, because when we talk about everyone getting a living wage, we talk about housing, we talk about all those things. What does that look like? Because ultimately, that's going to be hard, right? If we actually had to pay for the clothes that we buy, right? Like my Costco shirt or whatever, if I had to pay full actual price so that the person that made it got a living wage, like what does that look like? How do we have that conversation about where we're going in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that is tricky about the kind of current context in which we live is that 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 for so long we have been told that the kind of cost of living in a just economy is too great, right? The cost of ending poverty would just be massive. And what we aren't having a conversation about is the cost of inequality and the cost of having almost half of a US population, and just billions upon billions of people across the world who are living in inordinate poverty, just like unbelievable, deadening poverty. And so, I mean, I think, I'm not an economist. The best I can do is with biblical economics, as you're talking about, just because I do spend some real time looking at what the Bible says, about how we're supposed to live with each other and even organize the economy, to be honest. And whether it's from Jubilee, or manna, or there's these various biblical kind of principles around the economy. Um, you know, the thing about Jubilee is that, and this was true. Historians have shown this to be the case as well. I mean, I use sometimes the work of Michael Hudson, who has looked at kind of debt and Jubilee and debt, forgiveness in the ancient world, going before the kind of Hebrew scriptures were written, and then throughout biblical times. Um, and and what Deuteronomy 15 teaches us, for instance, and what Jubilee kind of suggests, is that if you pay people a living wage and you lend out money knowing you may never get paid back, and you cancel all debts, and you invest in the kinds of things that are going to lift people up from the bottom, what it says in the text is that then your whole nation will flourish, right? Which I just think is opposite of what we have been told and what we think about economics. We think that if we save money, and if we, suppress wages, and if we never lend out money, and if people have to pay their debts back, we can never cancel them, that's how the economy does well. But the Bible tells us otherwise, and ancient historians also have documented that actually, the practices of debt consolation, the practices of paying people a living wage, actually are better for everybody, and actually create a society and an economy that works for everybody. And so, again, I've read some studies about, for instance, things like living wages. And, I live in New York City. And before we had a $15, and now more than that, a minimum wage, people had said, this is going to put all small businesses out of business. This is going to be very bad. And guess what? None of those things happened. Like, in fact, when lower income people have more money, because they're earning more money, because they're being paid a more decent wage, then people are able to, invest that money in the local bodega, and in the ballet classes for their kids, and in and this is what happens. And it's actually good for the economy. And that it doesn't mean that, like, I just have to pay higher prices for everything. That actually more of where inflation comes from, more of where, like, costs get too high, is because of the greed of the richest and the corporations, and because of policies and structures that are put in place to funnel money from the bottom to the top. But actually, if with what the world is producing right now, if we were just to distribute it in a different way, where people could earn a living wage, and where people could have healthcare and these kinds of things, everyone could actually uh, live a full life. It would benefit and redound to a healthier and better society. I mean, someone like Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel laureate on economics, has shown this to be true, right? Just that the cost of inequality, the cost of poverty, are actually greater than the cost of fixing those kinds of problems. And so I kind of hope that we could start in our society having a deeper conversation about what it looks like, to actually organize society in a way that people could have their basic needs met. and could actually, you know, live to their more fuller potential, and that this would actually, make our whole society stronger and better for everyone.
The concern I have as a union organizer, and somebody who worked in factories and around mines for so long, we're talking about a current model, producing wealth and producing the wealth that people pay taxes on. And it no longer feels sustainable to me. Wages increasing to the level that they have to mean that the levels and the rate of exploitation also have to increase. And Greg is asking a good question. So we get to this point of following biblical economics, and it sounds like I'm objecting, and I'm not. And then we ask, what now? And just asking the question, what now, implies that we need some planning. And planning and capitalism seem to be very much in contradiction to one another. So I'm wondering how you take that on. And then hearing you speak and reading your great book, another question comes up as well that I think is related. You make a very compelling case for framing these issues in a human rights lens. And I argued for years that we ought to include the Declaration of Human Rights as part of our union contracts. Put those in the back and make them grievable. Because every day workers' human rights are denied. In this conversation about human rights and how we get to a point of biblical economics, though, I've wondered about if we're not disappearing ourselves by insisting, when we don't insist on group rights. You make a good case in your book. We don't talk about like a national health care service. We talk about the price of metformin or something, right? We don't talk about worker co-determination. We talk about, do you get labor law reform, and can you vote in a union election someday? Maybe. Are we disappearing ourselves by using the old civil rights framework instead of talking about group rights? And how do we get to the heavy question, I guess, the $1 million question, no pun intended? How do we get to biblical economics without increasing the level of exploitation? What does that look like, right? How do we get beyond that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an organizer and a pastor and a biblical scholar. Those are the areas of expertise that I have. And what I do know is that, like, we live in one of the richest countries ever to have existed. And yet there are almost half of the people who are living in or a couple $100 away from poverty. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like, that's what I know. And that, like, that Bible passage of, like, where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. I mean, like, the national treasure of the US kind of budget, shows where its heart is. And its heart is not on young people and education and healthcare. So how we get to a place where everybody is able to live a full life. I'm not saying that I know how to get there. I just know it can be done. And the reason I know it can be done is because, again, we throw out more food than it takes to feed everybody across the world that's hungry. And so it's not a problem of scarcity. And so then the question is, how do we get together and develop the political will and the moral consciousness to actually solve that problem? Because, or when I was taking over houses, abandoned houses with unhoused families in Philadelphia, like I talk about in You Only Get What You're Organized to Take, And in Philadelphia, when I was doing that, there were more abandoned houses just in the city alone than there were unhoused people. Like, I know it can be done uh, because the numbers tell us. But then how you do that exactly, uh, uh, that's where we have to have a division of labor, and folks that have expertise that I do not have can help show us that way. I also know that, for instance, when the US in the first years of COVID were investing more money in something like the child tax credit, um, just a one little program with a couple $100s a month that families were getting, was able to raise 4 million kids above the poverty line. And that those kids, and actually more than that number, were thrown right below the poverty line again when they took away that one little program. And so I think that there are some simple solutions that are out there. A lot of times people wring their hands and say, we don't know how we're going to solve poverty. But you know, it's not necessarily that we need more job training or that we need more, all of the things that people put in the way. But actually, that to end poverty, you need to invest in the kinds of things that are going to lift people out of poverty, including putting more money into people's hands, that then they're able to spend in ways that redound for the good of everybody. And so, how we get there, to me, right now, we have to build the political will to even get there. And then hopefully along the way, develop some folks that have expertise that I do not, who are able to then put forward some of the solutions, the policies, the programs, the budgets, the plans, like you're talking about, that actually could make a difference in people's lives. uh and again, like I come from this from a more moral and theological point of view of what does it say about our society that 60% of people have been reporting in the last couple of months that they can't make ends meet, um, at a moment when our Congress passed, the biggest kind of budget bill that takes money from the bottom and puts it to the top, and in US history. Like, what does that say morally we are as a nation? Or theologically, what does it say to have half of kids in this country living in food insecure homes? What does that say about God? God created enough. Like, you can't say that God didn't create enough. But why is it that then in that we can have, you know, so many kids going hungry? And to me, that's a theological problem, and a political problem. And then where people come in that know things that I do not know, is then how do we kind of put those together to solve these moral and political problems?
So do you think that as we get to that point of developing that division of labor and making those demands, do you think that we're disappearing ourselves by using the civil rights model that we've been using instead of insisting on the group rights that you talk about in your book? Do you see a contradiction there?
I mean, I have definitely heard the critiques that when you use human rights, that it's about individual rights, and it's not about kind of collective rights. But we live in a society that is very individualistic, and I think to even start a conversation about that everybody should have the right to healthcare, that everybody,
It's one of the songs we sing. Everybody's got a right to live, to live.
that's right, exactly. And I think this notion of rights, is a really powerful and important one, and that has a long history even in this country. And so, I mean, I, I think when you're looking at social movement building, you always have to learn from the past. But it also is always true that new times call for new tactics. And I think I think that's true. I mean, what folks did in abolition was different than what folks did in women's suffrage, which was different than what folks did in the Black freedom struggle in terms of civil rights and labor rights. I mean, right? I mean, there's ways to learn and to adapt, and um there's differences. And so I mean, I think one of the significant changes that's happened in the past 50 or 60 years is that in the 60s there was a kind of growing pie, and uh and a- and the question was, can everybody get more out of this kind of growing pie? But today, now there's um uh kind of uh so for instance, I think when I think about the 50s and 60s and 70s, I think about that JFK quote of kind of a rising tide lifts all boats, right? But if we think about, you know, the world today, we have a couple of yachts that are sinking the rest of the boats. And so it's so there's differences, in the politics and in the economics of the moment. But there's a lot to be learned about this notion that everybody's got a right to live, which is a concept that we get from the civil rights movement, even from that song that was written by freedom fighters back in the 60s. And so to me, there's always things to learn, uh and there's always things that have to shift.
One of the things I think that sort of piggybacking on what Bob was saying was that us lefties, liberals, have this weird purity culture that we fall under, and we sort of like individualize ourselves. And so one of the things that we've really latched onto and really love about the Poor People's Campaign and the work that you've been doing, and you and Dr. Barber as well have been doing, is this like it's for everybody. And I think I would say for me, I would say Mike Brown and Ferguson was a turning point. Our colleague, Reverend Bruce Reyes Chow, wrote a book a decade or so ago called But You Don't See Me as Asian, or I Don't See You as Asian. And that was my first sort of, because I'm middle-class white dude. Now I have a lot of education, and I have a chronic disease and a learning difference. So I've sort of skated through a lot of that. But I think over at least for me, the last 10 years have been this eye-opening experience of like, no, I'm actually part of this. Like I think with the civil rights movement, and my understanding of their history and doing deep dives into that, and reading one of my favorite books is The War on Poverty to the War on Drugs, which is pre-Michelle Alexander's fantastic book. But so learning all about the history of that, and then saying like, that's arm's length. That's not me. That's not my community. Even though I grew up in a duplex in Dallas, Texas, and in other places, I've moved a lot. But I think for the last 10 years, and the people that Bob and I interact with are realizing that it's them also. It includes them, like the story of oppression, the story of scarcity, the story also like as an example. So our denomination has Blue Cross Blue Shield as part of their insurance. Well, the only hospital in Salem, Oregon, no longer accepts Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's also the only ER. It's the busiest ER on the West Coast in small Salem, Oregon. And so if I have to go to the thing that might not be an emergency, but might be an emergency, I have to drive 30 miles, 30 minutes to go to a different ER that might get closed down now because of the big, beautiful bill. So I think it's more obvious. I think sort of to Bob's point was this idea that sometimes we get lost in the milieu by, but because I think people say, well, that's not me, so I must not be a part of that. So how do we continue to cover that conversation about, no, actually this, like white folks are hurt by white supremacy. I mean, differently, and men are hurt by patriarchy, and like sort of all those things. Like there is a better way, but there needs to be you talked about political will to actually like push just a little bit further. I don't know if that's where you were going, Bob, but I was just.
It is, but it feels to me like for 170, I'll use the labor movement as an example because that's what I know. It feels to me for like 175 years we've been fighting for inclusion and assimilation and the rights of individual citizenship. And it means that we're getting included and maybe burying ourselves in a society that increasingly rejects us, that I don't really want to be a part of. I thought your discussion on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and group rights was just great. I mean, it just draws this connection that the two are mutually dependent. I guess that's closer to my point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Reverend Liz, I know we're coming to the end of our time, and we know it's a big day. You're a busy person, so the one question I want to end with. And is what is some media that you are engaging with? Like, what are you reading? What TikTok? What social media? What shows are you watching? I just started watching Mr. Robot thanks to our producer Chris. And I've like binge watched the first 2 seasons, and there was a big twist in the last episode. So we need to get off this so I can go watch it. Anyway, but so what are some of that media that you're engaging with and that might help those of our watchers, our listeners engage with, or that would be helpful or have been helpful for you?
I appreciate that. I mean, yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I do read the mainstream, media reports of from the New York Times to the Washington Post to on a regular basis. And I also am very cognizant of the fact that if we just read those sources, we are not hearing some of the full truth about what's really going on in people's lives. And so, I mean, I'm on Blue Sky and on TikTok and Instagram, and follow any number of folks on all of those socials because
I'm Rev Greg Bolt on TikTok, just in case you care.
oh yeah, all right, cool. I'm gonna.
And Salem FPC is our church handle on TikTok.
Oh yeah, excellent. I think Kairos has we have a TikTok, but I forget. I think it's Kairos Center NYC. And so, but I guess in terms of other media, I mean,
like, what do you watch with your kids? What do you like? Yeah.
I mean, so we we were just watching Andor season 2, which is
Talk about that's not friggin' right on the nose right now in our life.
I know. And my son and I were just reading, and so therefore had to watch all of the what is it called? Oh my gosh, Hunger Games like series again, because
Hunger Games also a good, yeah, Katniss.
Exactly. And just the latest book is about kind of the backstory, kind of in the middle.
It's the ballad of something and something.
Yeah, Songbird Snakes and so trying to think of what else we're watching. Well, we're always excited about superhero movies over here. I have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, so
mine are 13 and 15. Did you see Superman yet?
yeah. Oh yeah. I was shocked. I was shocked by how much I liked it. Because I'm more of a Marvel kind of girl than DC. And then there
Bob's lost. We're good. Let's keep going.
but like I just thought Superman was it was so good. We also saw the Fantastic Four. That was pretty fun. Have you seen that?
I have not seen Fantastic Four yet, but I took my kids to see Superman, and I like noticed myself just smiling during the movie. Like I was just like I had this big grin on my face. I thought that was I think that's I love Marvel movies and shows, and that's I said I don't know if I said this before about I quoting the movie Deadpool, which I watched with my kids while my wife is out of town. And that was like that's like the most gruesome movie we watched. But I did not expect there to be like a really like good sermon moment. I'd forgotten that was in there about. So at the end, Colossus, the X-Men, which is one of my favorite X-Men of all time, says to Deadpool about being a hero, and it's only 4 or 5 moments in your life that determine whether or not you're a hero. It's not always everything all the time. It's like there are 4 or 5 moments that you have in your life that make your that help you like have a like direct your life or the lives of others, like have a direct impact on your life or the life of others. So I was thinking about you when I asked you earlier about the how you got here question. You're like, well, I don't know. You know, it's just sort of like I just took the next step, and it reminded me of that Martin Luther King Jr. Quote about faith is taking the next step even if you can't see the whole staircase, or any of the sort of that. This will tell you where my brain is. Frozen 2 jumped into my head too, where the movie, the song that says "the next right thing," and I went with the Empower Initiative with Ben McBride, who's an activist. And I have a long story about Ben, but I won't bore you with it. But Ben and I have become friends. But he and I, with a group, went to Selma, and he was talking about some of the ancestors in the Birmingham kids crusade who were hanging from the tree, holding on to the trees while the dogs were out, and they said one of the elders said, we weren't thinking about making history, or we weren't thinking about the future. We were thinking about the next right thing in front of us. And I think to Bob's point about planning is antithetical to capitalism, and also you got to plan your book, right? You only get what you're organized to take. There's some planning in that bit. And there's Bob, do you have any more questions? Okay, can we ask one more? I got one more question, and Bob's got to go quick. No, your question is I want.
So just yesterday, I saw this beautiful thing I got from the Ohio and West Virginia Poor People's Campaign. And I'm thinking about how we use this here. It said, screw up your courage and come associate yourself with a handful of masters of the gospel, in quotes. Defy your own well-thought-out logic about identifying with religion, again, in quotes. Just show up and be yourself, because why? Because we love you for who you are. You got what it takes to hang with us. Trust us. And I think that's just such maybe there's not a question here, but it's such a beautiful thing. We live in a state where churches are pretty low on popularity.
The least church state.
So it's a real problem. We're at rallies, we do our Poor People's Campaign table, and inevitably somebody comes up to and says, well, I'm an atheist. Or I really I hate religion. I don't like religion. So what's my relationship with you anyway? And Pastor Greg and I have been talking about that. How do we respond to that? But it's a beautiful thing, this quote from Ohio and West Virginia. Do you have something to add to that?
No, I meant it. It's exactly the right sentiment, right? Just that, like, the question is, are we showing up as us, and that all are welcome.
Yeah, I love that, showing up as us. This is what Bob and I talked about, sort of like anyway, I could talk all day, but I know you're busy. But I want to ask you one last question. What is bringing you joy right now?
What is bringing me joy? I mean, my teenagers bring me a lot of joy. They're lovely and amazing. And the other thing that is bringing me joy is that, the last couple of months, kind of using the excuse of this book, I traveled to 42 different communities in the matter of a couple of months. And people are doing heroic, beautiful work. We don't hear about it really in the mainstream media, and it's not really like folks don't raise it up as like the kind of model of who we should be and how we should be acting in this moment. But people are just, defending their immigrant neighbors. They're protecting their trans youth in the community. They're figuring out, that everybody has food and health care, and just doing it kind of under the radar. But folks are just doing really amazing work, and the church is actually in there a lot of the time, just being actually what church should be. And so I think that gives me a lot of hope, and a lot of joy that, that people are in this difficult and dark moment, that people are really these kind of shining lights of hope and joy and love and peace. And that means that things can get better, and they will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bob and I we're planning a trip up to Grace Harbor, how we can connect with those folks up there. So Reverend Liz, thank you so much for your time, to reading your book some more, and to sharing it with all our friends. Thank you to Bob Rossi, co-host today.
Thank you.
And as the thing I say at the end of every church service is every single day God looks upon you and says, "Beloved, with you I am well pleased." Know that in here, feel that in here, and live that where you are. And I think you're one of those folks that is living out that belovedness, and I applaud you. And I will, if I see you in person again, I promise I won't make you sign an autograph of something. Thank you so much for your time and your experience and your sharing, and may the peace of God be with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, and also with you. Be well.
All right, thanks, Reverend Liz.